My wife destroyed my relationship with our only daughter, taught her to disrespect me, and never acknowledge me in public because I was a plumber. In her own words, she said, "You are just a plumber. You don't deserve anything from us." I didn't confront her immediately, but what happened will shock you. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Johnny Newman from Ohio. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. They say every man wears a mask, some to impress, others to protect themselves. Me? I wore mine out of necessity. It was a navy blue coverall stained with years of grease and grime, stitched with my name in fading white thread, Marcus. I was a plumber. Not glamorous, not polished. But every morning, I put that uniform on with pride. It wasn't just fabric, it was proof I knew how to fix things, pipes, drains, people's homes. I built my life from the ground up, no silver spoon, no shortcuts. When I met my wife, Liana, I thought I'd finally found someone who could see past the dirt under my fingernails and into the heart of a man who gave everything. Back then, she said my work ethic was sexy, even joked that her friends needed someone like me, a real man who knows how to get his hands dirty. But over the years, something changed in her eyes. Pride turned into pity, and pity slowly curdled into something uglier. Resentment, maybe. Embarrassment. At first, it was small. A little comment at dinner. A sideways glance when I came home smelling like copper and mildew. She stopped introducing me to her new friends at her corporate events. If she couldn't avoid it, she'd mumble he's in trade work, like it was something to be ashamed of. And then there was our daughter, Talia, our only child, the light of my damn life. I adored that girl. I was there for every ballet recital, every science fair, every scraped knee. I fixed the plumbing at her middle school for free because they couldn't afford repairs. I helped build the stage for her school play. And still, she began to pull away from me. She was a teenager now, easily swayed by the things her mother whispered when she thought I wasn't listening. "Don't let your dad embarrass you," Liana would say before dropping her off at a friend's house. "Maybe just tell them he owns a business. No need to say what kind." I swallowed the hurt because what else was I supposed to do? I told myself she was just trying to fit in. But it didn't stop the sting when Talia walked a few paces ahead of me in public or asked me to drop her off a block away. I started to feel like a ghost in my own home. I'd come back from a 12-hour day, my knees sore, hands raw, only to be met with silence. No, how was your day? No dinner on the table, even though I never expected it. But the silence was deafening. Liana had carved out a life that didn't include me unless she needed something fixed. The hot water tank, the garbage disposal. Her expectations of me were always mechanical, never emotional, never human. And every time I tried to talk about it, she'd brush me off. "Don't be so sensitive, Marcus," she'd snap. "You're just a plumber. You don't get to complain about how we see you." That phrase, "just a plumber," became her favorite weapon. It was like she had weaponized my livelihood against me, something I'd once thought she admired. She didn't just fall out of love. She started acting like she'd never been in it to begin with. And Talia followed suit, echoing her mother's tone, her sneers, her dismissive attitude. One day she actually said to me, with this smirk I'll never forget, "Mom says you should have aimed higher. Maybe then we wouldn't have to pretend we don't know you." I swear, I felt my soul leave my body. I think I stayed longer than I should have because I kept hoping things would go back to how they were when we first met. I kept remembering that night we danced in our empty living room, still in our 20s, drinking cheap wine and laughing about how we'd make it big someday. She used to look at me like I was her future. Somewhere along the way, she started looking through me like I was part of the furniture. And maybe I was. Useful but unremarkable. Background noise. That realization didn't hit all at once. It was more like a slow leak that eventually flooded the house. I tried to patch it with kind gestures, surprises, a vacation I couldn't afford. But she didn't want me. She wanted the idea of someone else. Someone more polished, more prestigious, more palatable to the social circles she now ran in. So, I stood in the kitchen one night, watching her scroll through her phone while Talia laughed in another room, and I felt something break. Not a dramatic snap, just a quiet shift inside, like a wrench turning. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed next to a woman who hadn't touched me in months and stared at the ceiling, wondering how I ended up here, unloved in my own home. I thought about all the jobs I'd taken to keep us afloat, the birthdays I missed to pay off debt, the cold showers I took so my daughter could have hot water during winter. And none of it mattered. I was still just a plumber. That phrase echoed like a curse. The next morning, I got up before the sun, like I always did. I showered, dressed, and drove to my first job. But everything felt different. Like I was done fixing things that didn't want to be fixed. Maybe, for once, it was time to stop tightening bolts and start letting things leak. Let the mess show, let the damage be seen. Because I was tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being someone's burden. Tired of loving people who treated me like a utility. By the end of that week, I knew. I wasn't going to keep living like a ghost in a house I built with my own damn hands. I wanted respect. Not adoration, not praise, just basic human decency. And if my wife and daughter couldn't offer that, then they didn't deserve the man who used to crawl through sewage lines just to keep the lights on. I wasn't perfect. I had my temper. I held grudges. But I never stopped trying. I never stopped showing up. And they stopped seeing me. That was the moment I realized I had to leave. Not just for me, but for the man I used to be, the one who still lived somewhere under all the grease and heartbreak. The day I decided to stay silent was the day I realized nothing I said would matter anymore. It wasn't a choice made out of cowardice. It was survival. I'd spent years explaining myself, pleading for understanding, asking over and over, what did I do to deserve this? And every time, the response came not in words but in the shrugs, the eye rolls, the way Liana turned her back before I'd finished speaking, the way Talia ignored me when her friends were around. There's a pain in being unwanted that doesn't come with yelling or slamming doors. It's quieter, slower, like death by 1,000 sighs. So I chose silence, not as surrender, but as protest. I stopped reacting when Liana told people at dinner parties that I ran a small home service. I stopped correcting Talia when she told her friends I wasn't available for school events. I was always available, they just stopped asking. The house didn't change, but I did. I became a visitor in my own home, a tenant who paid bills but was denied affection. I'd wake up before dawn, step over laundry that wasn't mine, pass by a cold, empty coffee pot, and start my van before the sun had even kissed the pavement. Most days, I didn't hear a single good morning or drive safe. When I came back at night, my daughter was usually in her room, earbuds in, her door closed. My wife was either on her laptop or watching something on TV that she claimed I wouldn't understand. I'd heat leftovers if there were any, or make a sandwich, sit alone at the kitchen table while the soft hum of the dishwasher filled the silence. And every now and then, I'd look down at my hands, calloused, bruised, still stained from work, and wonder how they'd ever held a child or a woman who once claimed to love me. But the moment that finally gutted me, really tore me open, came one Saturday afternoon at the mall. I'd gone there to fix a leaky valve in a salon. Afterward, still in uniform, I walked into the food court to grab a quick lunch before heading to my next job. That's when I saw them, Liana and Talia, sitting with two of her friends, sipping on iced coffees and laughing. My heart lifted for a second, naive as it was. I walked toward them with a small smile, expecting at least a nod, maybe even an invite to join them. Instead, Talia saw me first, her eyes locking onto my name tag like it was a stain. Then, in front of her friends, she turned her head and said something under her breath to her mom. Liana glanced up at me, just for a split second, and then looked right past me like I was part of the wall. They didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't even acknowledge I existed. I stood there, 15 feet away, holding a tray of chicken tenders and fries, watching the people I loved pretend I was invisible. I didn't eat that day. I threw the food in the trash and went back to work, trying not to let the tears fall while tightening a busted pipe beneath someone else's sink. That night, Liana came home like nothing had happened. She said, "We ran into a few friends at the mall," as she put her shopping bags down. I asked, quietly, trying not to let the pain slip into my voice, "Did you see me there?" She didn't even look up. "I don't think so," she said. Were you? That was the first time I felt something cold crawl into my chest. Not sadness, not even rage, just emptiness, like a hollow pipe. That was when I stopped speaking unless it was absolutely necessary. No more conversations, no more efforts to connect. I came home, I showered, I ate, and I went to bed. And in that silence, I started making plans, not vengeful, not dramatic, just necessary. In those 3 months, I started keeping a second account. I moved money quietly, began pricing apartments, looking into legal fees. I made no announcements, no threats. I think some part of me wanted to give them time to realize what they were losing, to notice the quiet, to feel the ache of my absence even while I was still physically present. But they never did. In fact, it got worse. Liana grew bolder in her condescension. One morning, while talking on the phone in the kitchen, she laughed and said, "No, he's not here. He's out snaking toilets, or whatever plumbers do." I was in the hallway. She knew I could hear. She didn't care. And Talia? She started calling me Marcus instead of Dad when she introduced me to people, if she introduced me at all. I told myself maybe they were hurting too, just in ways I couldn't see. Maybe Liana was resentful because life hadn't turned out how she expected. Maybe Talia was confused, trying to fit in at school where prestige mattered more than presence. But those are the lies you tell yourself when you don't want to face the truth. And the truth was simple. They didn't respect me because they didn't value me. Not as a man, not as a father, not even as a person. And love without respect? That's not love at all. That's proximity, obligation, habit. So on a rainy Wednesday, while Liana was at work and Talia was still at school, I stood in the bedroom we used to share, packed a suitcase, and drove to the apartment I'd already signed the lease for. I left a note on the table. Nothing dramatic. Just, I can't keep fixing what doesn't want to be repaired. That was it. No begging. No blame. Just the truth. I filed for divorce the next morning. 3 months of silence led me to clarity. And that clarity became the foundation for the rest of my life. I didn't expect a reaction, not really. But part of me, maybe the smallest part, hoped for one. A call. A text. A knock on the door. Something. Instead, there was nothing. Not at first. No tears. No pleading. Just more silence. Only now it came from their end. And as painful as it was, it confirmed what I'd feared. I was never what they wanted. I was just the man who paid the bills, unclogged the drains, and stayed quiet. Until I didn't. There's something strangely anticlimactic about walking away from a marriage. You expect fireworks or screaming or at least a slammed door, but often, the real end comes with a whisper, not a bang. For me, it came with paperwork. A couple dozen pages, signatures, dates, and then silence. After I filed for divorce, Liana didn't even bother to call. She sent a short email through her lawyer asking about the car title and a few shared accounts. That was it. No arguments. No questions. Not even a fake tear. I had imagined it so many times in my head. Her breaking down, realizing what she had done, begging for a second chance. But instead, she let me go like I was a bag of garbage she forgot to put out on the curb. That indifference? That was the final wound. Not a deep cut, but a slow, aching bruise that told me I'd been right to leave. I had loved her. God, I had loved her. But I was done being an appliance, useful when needed, ignored when not. I threw myself into work with a desperation that bordered on obsession. My crew was small, loyal, and talented, mostly guys I'd trained myself. We weren't flashy, but we were consistent, and in this line of work, consistency mattered. Then came the call. A large development firm in the city had just fired their regular plumbing contractor due to a licensing issue. They needed someone fast, someone reliable, someone who could handle a job that spanned multiple buildings, tight deadlines, and high expectations. I didn't know it then, but that one call would change everything. I showed up at the meeting in the same uniform I'd been mocked for, shook hands with a man in a tailored suit who didn't flinch at the grease on my palm, and walked away with a signed contract that would triple my company's revenue in 6 months. Success didn't hit like a wave. It rose slowly, like water in a flooded basement. Within weeks, my phone was ringing nonstop. I hired more staff, upgraded our trucks, built a website, and secured additional contracts through referrals. Local magazines started calling me the king of copper and the man who rebuilt a city one pipe at a time. Suddenly, the same work that made me invisible was making me unavoidable. It was ironic, no poetic. I didn't need to change who I was to become successful. I just needed to walk away from people who couldn't see my worth. And that's when the messages started. Not from clients, but from Liana. At first, it was passive. "Talia misses you," she texted. Then, "I didn't know things were going so well. Congrats." I didn't respond. Then the tone shifted. "You made all this happen after we split? How convenient." Followed by, "Did you lie to me? Was this always your plan?" As if I'd orchestrated a decade of humiliation just to stage the perfect revenge arc. The arrogance of that thinking was astonishing. I ignored her, but it didn't stop. She started showing up, first at my old apartment, then at my office, pretending she wanted to talk about co-parenting, though Talia was 17 and barely acknowledged me anymore. The truth? She was panicking, not because she missed me, but because the man she had discarded now had something she couldn't control. And then came the bombshell. Talia posted a photo on Instagram of a new car, one clearly paid for by her mother, with the caption, "Rewarding myself for surviving the embarrassment of growing up with a plumber dad." The comments were full of laughing emojis and snide jokes. One even said, "At least you glowed up." That was the moment I stopped hoping she'd come around. That post wasn't a mistake. It wasn't heat of the moment. It was a public execution of whatever love we had left. And it worked. Something in me died reading those words. I felt it. Not anger. No, not at first. Just grief. Like watching your childhood home burn down and knowing the fire was set by your own blood. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't even confront her directly. Instead, I printed the post, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the same box where I kept the ultrasound picture from when she was still in the womb. Proof that I had loved her. Proof that she hadn't loved me back, at least not enough to defend me when it mattered. And then, in the middle of this emotional wasteland, came Denise. Liana's best friend. Or former best friend, I should say. Denise had always been kind. Polite. The type of woman who made everyone feel welcome at parties and remembered your favorite drink. She'd seen it all. Witnessed the small humiliations I endured at every dinner. Heard Liana's snide remarks. Watched Talia turn cold. But she never joined in. In fact, I remember one night, long before the divorce, she pulled me aside and said, "I don't know how you put up with it. You deserve better, Marcus." I hadn't thought much of it then, chalked it up to awkward sympathy. But after the divorce, when she heard what happened, she reached out. "I just wanted to check in," her message read. "I always thought you were worth more than they saw. We met for coffee, then dinner. Then dinner turned into long walks, and those turned into real conversations. For the first time in years, someone asked how I was doing. Not what I was fixing or building or paying for, but how I felt. Denise made me laugh again, made me feel human. She didn't flinch when I talked about the hurt or when I admitted I didn't know if I could ever trust someone again. She just listened, held space, and reminded me, gently, without pressure, that I was more than what Liana had reduced me to. When I finally told Liana that Denise and I were seeing each other, the reaction was immediate and nuclear. "You're disgusting," she hissed over the phone. "You went after my friend?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I just said, "She treated me like a person. That's more than I can say for you." She hung up. The next day, Talia posted another cryptic quote on Instagram about betrayal and fake people. I didn't comment. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval. I was chasing peace. I won't pretend I didn't wrestle with guilt. I did. I still do some nights. But I also remember them all. The text messages. The silence. And I remind myself, I didn't abandon them. They left me long before I ever walked away. I had tried. I had stayed longer than I should have. And now, finally, I was choosing myself. Choosing love that didn't come with conditions or contempt. The invitation came printed on ivory cardstock, embossed in gold. A mutual friend's birthday dinner at a new rooftop restaurant downtown. I almost didn't go. It felt like a trap, a stage set for some passive-aggressive performance. But Denise encouraged me. "You've got nothing to prove," she said, placing her hand gently on mine. "Let them see what they threw away." She didn't mean it spitefully, just plainly, like someone who knew I still carried the weight of being discarded. And she was right. I wasn't hiding anymore. I had built something real. I had peace. But still, walking into that restaurant felt like entering a battlefield in a good suit instead of armor. The place was packed, all glass walls and flickering candles, with a view that made the city look softer than it ever really was. I saw Liana the moment I stepped inside. She wore red. She always did when she wanted attention. Talia sat beside her, scrolling on her phone like the world existed in pixels and filters. They looked up at the same time. Liana's eyes narrowed. Talia froze, then quickly looked away. I wasn't expecting warmth, but the ice still stung. I felt Denise's hand on the small of my back, grounding me. We walked in together, and when the host asked for my name, I said it loud enough for the whole damn room to hear. Marcus Bell. Reservation for 2. Dinner began civilly enough. Toasts, laughter, shallow conversations. I kept my voice low, my smile polite. But I knew it was coming. The moment when civility would crack. It started when the birthday girl, a mutual acquaintance of Liana and mine, raised her glass and said, "To second chances, and to people who rise even when others try to bury them." She looked straight at me. The table clapped. Most of them smiled. Liana didn't. She sipped her wine like it was poison and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some people rise because they step on others to get there." A silence fell, just for a moment. Then Denise leaned in and said, without missing a beat, "No, some people rise because they were underestimated for far too long." She smiled sweetly, her voice calm, but the room knew it was a line in the sand. "And Liana?" She snapped. "You really think you're better than me now?" she hissed, turning toward me. "Just because you made a little money? You think that erases who you are? You're still the guy who used to come home smelling like sewage. You're still just a plumber." There it was. The phrase. Sharp and familiar. And this time, it didn't land. It floated in the air, pathetic and brittle. I let it hang for a moment before I responded. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I'm still a plumber. And I'm also a business owner. And a husband to someone who actually respects me." My voice didn't rise. I didn't shake. I just told the truth. "You used to laugh when I came home late, covered in grease, thinking I'd never be more than a guy who fixed your sink. But now, you're sitting across from the man who owns the largest plumbing company in this city. And you're still bitter. That's not my problem anymore." People were watching. Phones were probably recording. But I didn't care. This wasn't for them. This was for the man who used to sleep in silence, wondering why love felt so cold. Liana's face crumpled, just for a second, before she pulled her mask back on. "You lied to us," she spat. "You hid your plans. You made us think you were struggling." "I was struggling," I cut in. "While you were busy telling our daughter to be ashamed of me, I was working 70-hour weeks trying to keep the lights on. I didn't lie. I just didn't give up when you stopped believing in me." I stood then, not dramatically, just with quiet finality. "And I'm done letting you rewrite the story to make yourself feel better." Talia finally looked up. Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat. Something flickered there. Maybe regret. Maybe just surprise that I wasn't backing down. I waited. I wanted her to say something. Anything. But she didn't. She just looked back down at her phone, retreating into her screen like it could shield her from the truth. Denise rose beside me. "We'll head out," she said. "Happy birthday." And just like that, we left. Outside, the air was sharp with autumn. I exhaled, long and slow. Denise slid her arm through mine. "How do you feel?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how to. It wasn't relief. It wasn't triumph. It was grief. Grief for the man who spent years asking, "What am I doing wrong?" when the answer had never been about him. Grief for a daughter who once called me her hero and now wouldn't even say my name. But under that grief, something else had taken root. Something strong. Something still. Peace. The days that followed were messy. The video of the dinner argument made its rounds through our circle. People chose sides. Some texted me privately, saying they always knew Liana was cruel. Others stayed silent, pretending neutrality when neutrality only ever benefits the aggressor. Talia didn't reach out. Not to apologize. Not even to lash out. Just silence. I checked her profile once. She'd unfollowed me, deleted old photos, scrubbed me from her digital life like I was a bad memory. That hurt. God, it hurt. But I didn't try to fix it. I didn't send a message. I didn't ask Denise if I should reach out. I had done enough reaching. I was done bleeding for people who never brought a bandage. I focused on my business, on my marriage, on the parts of my life that felt real. Denise brought light back into my world, not through grand gestures, but through small kindnesses, a hand on my back during long days, warm meals, laughter that didn't come at my expense. She didn't try to erase the past. She just stood beside me while I walked through it. And in that partnership, I found something I hadn't had in years: peace without conditions. The break was clean. No negotiations. No reconciliations. Just silence on both ends. And for once, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. It wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of a life no longer spent begging to be seen. We got married quietly. No ballroom. No orchestra. No six-tier cake with sparklers. Just Denise, me, and 30 people who had watched me crawl through darkness and finally choose light. We rented a small garden space at a friend's vineyard, where the air smelled like late summer and lavender. I wore a dark gray suit, the same one I had picked out for business meetings, and Denise walked down the aisle in a soft, champagne-colored dress that made her look like something from a life I hadn't dared to dream. We said our vows under string lights and stars, and when I looked into her eyes, I didn't feel like a man who had settled. I felt like a man who had finally come home. There was no rush of adrenaline, no fairy tale climax. Just a quiet steadiness in my chest, the kind that says, "You're safe now. You chose right this time." I wish I could say that tying the knot tied up all the loose ends. But real life doesn't wrap up so neatly. The backlash came slowly, like a leaky faucet you think you can ignore until it floods the floor. First came the texts from Liana, venom disguised as concern. I guess Denise couldn't find anyone else desperate enough. Or, "So you're really playing house with my friend?" Pathetic. I blocked her number after that. I didn't need her noise. I had lived long enough surrounded by people who only spoke to injure. Then came the whispers, the so-called friends who suddenly had opinions about the timeline, about how quickly Denise and I got together, about what it meant. As if they had sat beside me during the nights I cried into my steering wheel, wondering how my daughter could look through me like I was made of fog. And then, finally, came Talia. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon when I found her letter in the mailbox. Handwritten. No return address. Just my name in blocky letters on the envelope. My fingers hesitated before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it away, afraid of what it might say. But curiosity won. Inside were 3 pages, messy, uneven, parts crossed out and rewritten. She didn't apologize, not exactly. But she said she'd been confused, that she had let other voices influence her feelings. She said she didn't understand how hard I worked until she had to pay her own rent. She said she was still figuring things out, and maybe one day we could talk. I sat on the porch, reading that letter again and again until the words blurred. I didn't write her back. Not because I hated her, I didn't. Not even close. But because I finally understood that healing doesn't always come in the form of reconnection. Sometimes, healing is knowing you could reach out and choosing not to. Not yet. Not until the wounds become scars. I kept the letter in a drawer next to the ultrasound photo, the Instagram post, and the court paperwork. A time capsule of all the things I survived. A reminder that pain, like pipes, can be patched, but the damage remains. And sometimes, that damage needs to be left visible, so you never forget what broke and why. Life with Denise was simple in all the ways I'd always craved. We laughed a lot. We cooked together. We argued over dumb things, like whether the towels should be folded or rolled. And we supported each other without keeping score. She didn't care if I came home smelling like copper or PVC glue. She didn't flinch when I worked late or got up early. She understood that love isn't loud, it's consistent. It's remembering how you take your coffee and not holding your worst days against you. And I gave her the same grace. We weren't perfect, but we were kind. And that kindness felt revolutionary. Business continued to boom, but I didn't chase expansion anymore. I had money in the bank, a crew I trusted, and a reputation that spoke for itself. I didn't need to be the biggest company, just the most respected. I started mentoring younger tradesmen, especially the ones who reminded me of myself at 25. Rough edges, big dreams, no guidance. I told them the truth. The world won't always clap for you. Sometimes, you'll be your only applause. But that's enough if you know what you're building. I think they listened. At least, I hope they did. I wanted them to learn what took me 20 years to understand. Dignity is quiet. It's in the work, the effort, the showing up. One afternoon, while restocking inventory at the warehouse, one of my guys told me Liana had stopped by. She just walked in, he said, unsure. Said she needed to talk to you. I sighed, told him to send her away. But when I looked outside, I saw her car still parked out front. She didn't come in again. Didn't call. Just waited. Maybe hoping I'd step outside. I didn't. I finished my inventory check and went home to Denise. That was the last time I saw Liana in person. And honestly, I was grateful. Some doors need to remain closed. Not out of bitterness, but because walking through them again only leads to more damage. A few months later, Denise and I hosted a cookout. Nothing fancy, just ribs, potato salad, cornbread, a couple of cold beers. A neighbor brought his little girl over. She couldn't have been older than 6. Her balloon got tangled in a tree, and without thinking, I grabbed a ladder and got it down for her. Her dad chuckled and said, "Man, you're like the neighborhood hero." I laughed. But that night, Denise looked at me while we were cleaning up and said, "You know, you still show up for people, even when they don't ask. That's who you are." And I realized she was right. I hadn't let the pain change my nature. I was still the man who fixed things. Only now, I knew which things were worth fixing. I drove past the old house one evening, long after the sun dipped below the rooftops and the streetlights flickered on like quiet sentinels. It wasn't planned. I was heading home from a late emergency call, a burst pipe in an elderly couple's basement, when I took a wrong turn, or maybe a familiar one. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The bushes were overgrown, the porch light burned out, and the siding hadn't been washed in years. A cracked window pane reflected the amber streetlight back at me like a mirror asking, "You still miss this?" I sat there in my truck for a long minute, engine idling, hands resting on the steering wheel. I wasn't there to stalk, or reminisce, or stir up anything. I just needed to see the place where I had once been a ghost inside my own life. To remind myself how far I'd come. I used to imagine myself pulling up to that house as a successful man, maybe even with my daughter in the passenger seat, both of us laughing about how things used to be. But that was a fantasy, one of many I'd finally let go of. The real closure didn't come from dramatic confrontation. It came from realizing I didn't need to be acknowledged to be valid. I didn't need an apology from Liana to know I had been wronged. I didn't need Talia's social media approval to prove I was a good father. Those needs used to weigh on me like a toolbox full of wet cement, dragging behind me, slowing my every step. But not anymore. Not since I built a life around people who saw me, not as a punchline or a project, but as a person. Liana could tell whatever story she wanted, how I tricked her, how I was just a tradesman who got lucky, how Denise had stolen me. Let her. Let them. I no longer lived in the house where those lies were planted. I had moved. Physically, mentally, spiritually. I'd built something new, something solid. And this time, the foundation wasn't cracked by resentment or shaken by ego. A few weeks later, I ran into Talia. Not intentionally. I was fixing a restaurant sink uptown, one of those trendy places where everything on the menu is locally sourced and overpriced. I was tightening the faucet beneath the prep sink when I heard her voice behind me. "Is that really you?" I turned, stood, wiped my hands on a rag. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. Not broken, just weathered by life, the way we all get when we're finally paying our own bills. She gave me a hesitant smile. "Didn't think I'd run into you here," she said. I nodded. "I work a lot of these places now. Good business." She shifted uncomfortably, arms crossed, eyes darting. "I saw your company in the paper. Big contract downtown, huh?" I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at her. The little girl I used to carry on my shoulders through parades, the teenager who rolled her eyes when I asked how her day was, the young woman who erased me from her life with a caption. She opened her mouth, maybe to apologize. Maybe not. "I read your letter," I said quietly. She blinked, surprised. "I figured you might have." She waited. "So did I." "I meant what I said in it," she added after a moment. "I was dumb. And I was trying to be cool. And Mom, she wasn't exactly helping." I nodded again. I know. That was it. No forgiveness. No tearful reunion. Just recognition. And maybe that's all we were ever going to get. I didn't hug her. She didn't cry. We weren't there yet. Might never be. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not guilt. Not pity. Just reality. She finally saw me as a human being. And for now, that was enough. Back at home that evening, I told Denise about it. She didn't ask what Talia had said. She just listened, poured me a glass of wine, and rested her head on my shoulder. We sat on the back porch, the autumn wind curling through the trees, and for a long time, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Peace doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it slips in quietly, settles into your bones, and reminds you that you don't owe anyone an explanation for your healing. You just live it. Every day, loudly or quietly. But truthfully, my phone rang the next morning. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked it later, it was Liana's voice, strained, almost unrecognizable. I heard you saw her, she said. Talia told me. I guess you two talked. That's good. A pause. Then, I hope you're happy now. I really do. Another pause. Even if I still think you blindsided us, I can admit I didn't treat you right. I just didn't expect you to leave. She laughed bitterly. I thought you'd always stay. I deleted the message. Not out of anger. Just clarity. I had no interest in digging through ruins for pieces of a life that collapsed on top of me. I had survived it. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm. Denise and I planned a small vacation. I installed a new water heater at a women's shelter. I taught a new hire how to repair a pipe without making the same mistake I did at his age, over-tightening until it cracks. It's about pressure, I told him. Too much of it, and everything breaks. He laughed, thinking I meant just the pipe. But I wasn't talking about plumbing. Not really. I've come to believe that everyone underestimates the power of steady work. Not just in business, but in relationships. It's not the grand gestures that build trust. It's the daily effort, the quiet consistency, the refusal to give up even when no one's watching. That's the pride I carry, not in how far I've come, but in the fact that I never stopped showing up. Even when I was unloved. Even when I was invisible. Even when I was just a plumber. Now I walk into restaurants and people greet me by name. I get stopped in hardware stores by young guys asking how I got started. I get love notes from my wife tucked into my lunch bag. And every time I crawl under a sink or open up a valve, I remember, this work, these hands, they built a life worth living. Not flashy, not perfect, but mine. Entirely mine. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, that your work didn't matter, or that love should come with conditions, this story was for you. Sometimes, walking away isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing you can do. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment and tell us how you reclaimed your worth. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories about family, boundaries, and second chances. Your voice belongs here. See you soon in the next story.